What voters can see when they head to the polls today as they cast their ballot for the primaries?
Well, they're going to see a lot of yard signs. Sometimes the candidates will stand out there next to their yard signs, especially on election day. But they've been out there, for however long voting, the early voting has been going on, and so there's always the opportunity to get to meet one of the candidates that you're going to be voting for. But that's one of the things, I suppose. They're going to be, obviously, I don't know if they're facing long lines or not today. Not for sure. I don't know. But certainly in the run-up here, we've had a lot of early voting. I don't know exactly what those numbers are. It's a bunch across the state for sure. And so the way that's divided up with our county, they've got these wonderful election centers, voting centers, that people can probably expect to wait in line for a few minutes. But I don't know how much. I don't know how much their traffic has been. It's not something I've checked on today.
And so, what's going to be on? Actually, let's talk on this. We were talking about it before we started streaming. We're seeing a great Democratic turnout on that side. So tell me a little bit about why we're seeing kind of them turn out a little bit more this go around.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's not surprising. There's the opposition party, is normally expected to pick up some seats in a midterm. That's exactly what we're going through right now, a natural part of the cycle. And so yeah, there's a lot of energy that's being burned on the side of the Democratic candidates, and there means from whether that's we were talking a second ago just off the camera about the the role of competition there as in the party platform. Right, especially in a primary, how it's different because they're like just talking to the party itself. A lot of times the voter base, but yeah, there's been a lot more people that have turned out. I think I don't know what the exact. It's like 4 points or 5 points more. Democrats have voted early in this election, in this primary election. So it's yet to be seen. What the final numbers are on that are. There's all kinds of theories. About who shows up when. But yeah, I mean, it makes sense that the energy is going to be with the Democrats this primary season, and certainly in November even. There's a lot of reasons for that, partially driven by the situation at the national level, which is a presidential administration that's opposite them, a House and a Senate that are controlled largely by Republicans. So that image of a Republican-dominated institution is something that you can really cash in on in terms of having like being able to say that you're the I don't know what do you want to call it, the small one in the room, if you will, or the one that's not able to really fight in an upfront fashion, right? So that is one perspective on that. Of course, there's always a lot more than that. There could be real true blue opposition and a misreading, on the part of the Republicans as well of what's going on, and that's always to be taken with caution, especially in the primary, because you can end up pushing your base to the right or to the left, and how that ends up playing out in November. I mean, for example, Kim Paxton. There's been predictions in the Republican Party specifically, and there's been a lot of money that's been raised over this issue, that John Cornyn, if he is defeated by Kim Paxton in the primary, that would drive the Republican Party in the Senate further to the right because of the polarizing figure that he is. It's kind of hard to imagine anything being more polarized, than in some ways than it already is. And so, I mean, that theory is yet to be tested. But at the same time, it also goes to show the anxieties of the Republican Party as well, and the desire for stability, the desire for predictability is always there. And who's supporting who? Is it in the president's interest to support which candidate? And I mean that's always fascinating, driving voter turnout and all the other pressing issues that are going on in the world, whether it's economic or military or anything else.
So let's go down the ballot. What are some of the races that people are going to be voting for this primary? What are some of the races that people are going to be voting for?
Well, I mean, they're voting obviously for the U.S. Senate spot. They're voting for Texas Senate. They're voting for, we've got 38 Republican House seats. or Republican Democrat House seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. We have any number of Texas representative spots that are open. And so, yeah, I mean, there are quite a few of those. Obviously, the county level as well, but we're also voting on all the executive branch for the state of Texas offices as well. So that we were talking about comptroller a little bit earlier, and one of the things that confession that I neglected to pay as close attention to as I meant to was the comptroller race and the amount of money that's being spent there. I think that there's a lot of money that's potentially going to be spent in November. So whether or not it's being spent in the primary is always interesting to watch. I don't know what's going to happen.
And so, for people who kind of may misunderstand what a primary is, what is a primary? For people who are like, "Oh, I'm voting for Greg Abbott, so he's going to be the next governor."
Right.
For people who may not understand what a primary is, can you kind of explain that?
Certainly. So in a primary is an election that you have among to compete to see what the competition is for the ballot. So we have our election that's going to be in November, and then the parties specifically are going to test their candidates in a party primary. That generates all kinds of data for them, including who voted in which primary. Because in Texas we show up and declare which primary we want to vote in. And so it ends up becoming, not just the selection of what's going to be on the ballot, but also a selection of what's the most popular thing, which is exactly what an election is. So it makes sense that some of those issues also are on the ballot. But that's what a primary is. You're selecting your candidates. The party is trying to harden its steel, if you will, and get as many voters out as possible. And it's always fun to watch.
And then, you kind of mentioned there's some props also that people are going to be voting for today as well.
Yes. So part of that testing of the water is also that issues tend to also get tested. So, like for example, there are some pretty polarizing ones on the Republican side. Things that are playing with Republican base and off of the concerns of individuals in that party, and likewise, if you look at the Democratic ballot, you'll find non-surprising propositions on there. Even to give an example, there's a proposition that will to reassure that Americans should have be offered universal health care or health care for every individual. So that nobody dies without dignity or something along those lines. And what are you doing when you do that? As a proposition, what is it exactly? The proposal is among your party, especially in the primaries. So the question is, will it be on the ballot, in November? And again, it's a good way of testing the base there for especially the type of voter that's going to turn out for a primary is going to be your more likely voters, right? So whatever happens, they're going to have to figure out the candidates, Republican and Democrat, will have to figure out what message they want to have moving forward. So we were talking about the Democrat U.S. Senate primary here in Texas and the fierce competition going on there. It's which candidate is the most likely to drive out Democratic base in Texas generally across the state, and which one it's not as simple obviously as a simple calculation like that, which is exactly why they spar, and the calculus is that eventually they'll be able to figure out a message that's sharp enough to be able to hurt the opposition party in November. So it's an extremely important role in a job that they have. So it's obviously always interesting. There's nothing about it that isn't contested.
Yeah, and as we kind of continue on that race, we know that Cornyn, Paxton, and Wesley Hunter are the top three contenders for that seat. Do you see that race going into a runoff because of those three kind of vying for that seat? As people go out and cast their ballots today.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about that. There's certainly one of the purposes of having a three candidate fight over that is to be able to get into a, into a more narrow contest, right? Because you're dividing up the voter turnout into pluralities, and so that you're denying the simple majority to either one single candidate. Cornyn is, my understanding, is going into this today a little bit less favored than Ken Paxton. I mean, again, these polls are still open to change because people are still voting. They're still making up their minds. I mean, some people will not even realize that slot is open. I know this is going to be hard to imagine for people like us, but people will get to the poll and not even realize that was on the ballot. Just because we get bombarded with one race or multiple races, and you forget that there's 46 others or 45 others as well. It's just impossible to completely keep up with. So it's fascinating too, but for that reason. But having a third candidate in your party that's competing partially is the reason you do that. You want to be able to carve out small fragments or factions inside the Republican Party, specifically to do that. If I would venture to guess that the Democrats have the same strategy in elections where they have to do that in order to either fight off a candidate that they think is dangerous or going to push the party in one direction or another in a dangerous way, in which they feel like they might not be able to win in November, and sometimes you want that. I mean, frankly, sometimes you really want that compare and contrast to be as defined as possible, so that the candidates are, drawing clear lines about what they believe in, and then when whoever wins will be able to claim that they have a mandate from the people.
And then I want to narrow in on a race here that's getting a lot of attention. It's a Republican primary for House District 86. That's a seat that's been held by Representative John Smithy for over 40 years. So, how does somebody vote, or I shouldn't say how should somebody vote, but how does you do a race where a seat's been held for almost or over 40 years? How does you approach a seat like that where it's again one person holding that seat for 40 years?
I mean, it's a long time to be in office. It's a long time to serve your community, and there's certain, a level of predictability, a level of consistency, and their voting record. You know what they believe. If they voted against something 10 years ago, they're likely to vote in some way or form or fashion like today, and there's a level of comfort in that. That kind of gets disheveled when that person is no longer in office, and things are in flux in 86 as well, because it's really important for them to be able to draw compare and contrast against each other. It's like that's one of the signature things about American elections, and arguably any democracy, is that you have to figure out how to win, and that depends largely on marketing and your ability to market yourself in a way that divides a base up to where they can tell the difference between you and someone else. It's kind of unclear as to just because neither candidate has ever held the seat before, right? This is kind of an untested. It kind of brings us into uncharted territory, because a lot of times you want to be able to run. You want to be able to run if you're going to challenge somebody. You need to have grounds for the challenging. And when somebody steps down or chooses not to run in another election, that lack of or the inability to fight a formed candidate, right, creates the need to be able to have straw man arguments as well. Largely hypothetical scenarios where you're dishing out things about people's past associations. You do that, of course, regularly anyway, but it's more profound because there's just not a voting record that you can look back on in a way that you would if John Smithy were running.
Yeah, and I want to kind of touch on something, because we're seeing this a lot here in this area. A lot of representatives and a lot of our areas reps have kind of either stepped down or they have kind of moved on or retired. Whether it's John Smithy who's retiring, or we've seen Mac Thornberry who's retired. Ford Price has left. And so it's when this area kind of has see a change up. Is that something where the voters are kind of now having to kind of decide on people who are new faces to them? Is that kind of something where those voters? How does a voter approach that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. It's obviously it's an important one. One kind of wonders why do people leave? Why do the people choose to not run? I think is part of is part of that question, or part of the statement. And I mean, it's certainly it's a valid thing to be worried about or concerned about, or bring to just an observation. It's like obviously politics is one of these. I don't want to call it a business. It's not a business. It's you're literally representing the interests of people today. Like people. But I mean that can become more complicated when you've been doing it for a long period of time, because you've got all these other complicated or sophisticated emotions, right, wrapped around it, whether they're expectations or memories, or like the something like your folks or your parents or whatever the case may be. And remembering that is really important for any candidate, particularly in a race where somebody had achieved a certain amount of longevity and success in representing the interests of those very same people has chosen not to run again. So you have a chance to redefine a mold, but you also have an obligation to represent the people in a way that they find comfortable and predictable, and in a way that's not going to disrupt their ordinary day-to-day concerns in life. And I mean, it's a complicated thing to have to be able to do. So I would say that it's not a business, right? But it's an obligation, a trustee beneficiary relationship, and something certainly not to be taken lightly.
And then, as the primary, as we go on throughout the day, I guess what can people expect when it comes to somebody, getting those results? I know that in Texas, it's what is it, 50% plus one, or how can people expect when we see those results start rolling in?
Yeah, I mean, it's always kind of up in the air as to when we should call things. I mean, when is it too early to call? When is it too? Because I mean, if you call too early, obviously, you like cast doubt on the individual, and you kind of worry. I mean, certainly there's some concern about affecting like events rather than being a part, and just reporting on them. And it's something that I pay attention to too. It's like when is it too early, or when is it too late to call a race? And yet, obviously, when certain numbers are in, you kind of know that there's the chances or the likelihood that a single candidate's going to emerge victorious is right on the horizon, and it becomes more obvious as you go. For a good example of that in this current race would be like Ronnie Jackson, for example. I think he's fairly gonna win the Republican primary. I can go ahead and say that pretty confidently right now, just for the simple fact that I mean, how is there any other obstacle for him to overcome? But other races are more complicated or more challenging to call. For the simple fact that they're close going in, and the polling that people are generating from the exits at the polls are also not as contrasted or not as sharply divided, or they're closer, right? I mean, and voters, generally speaking, are not wanting to necessarily show up for a vote that they believe has already been finished. And I mean, it's of course we're in right prime time in the middle of all these tremendously divisive issues, and the candidates and the people. I think it's an overwhelming feeling also to be able to be a part of something where obviously an individual showing up for a vote, they're voting for their own household. That's an important. They're trying to stamp their approval or their disapproval on there. So it's kind of hard to figure out exactly when it's okay to call things. There are other people, of course, that would argue that it's better to wait until all the votes are in and until you can say decisively, here's the winner and here's how everybody voted. Yeah, I mean, that's a good question.
Yeah, and then another good question you brought up that's always kind of been on my mind is people who go, well, I'm not going to vote because I already kind of know who's going to win because like you said the maybe the competitor isn't as strong, or maybe that person I already kind of know that guy he's been in office for 20 years, so he's just going to stay in office.
Right.
But how important is it for people to go out and make their voices be heard? Because it's a part of our system. It's a part of who we are. So how important is it for people to, maybe if they still have that in their head, maybe to still go vote to let their voices be heard? Because
Yeah,
it could
no.
still make that every vote counts is what we always hear.
Yeah, and it's true. I mean, it's our civic obligation to show up and vote. But at the same time, we vote with our actions day to day, and it's important to show up every single day, especially in a democracy and a republic, and the fashion and the way of life that we have. But yeah, I mean, we've got to have these are clear opportunities to make your voice heard, and if enough people get in and try to make their voice heard together, you can really change the outcome of an election, and you can change the path that you're on, which is just an amazing thing. I've heard elections referred to as like a type of revolution, and that's exactly, I think, what they're intended to be. They're a legitimate form of the transfer of power if they're needed. And I mean, again, you can choose to keep a mandate. You can choose to change a mandate, over time. And it's not surprising. Again, we're facing lots of divisive issues in the country, whether it's being generated from Republicans or Democrats, but it brings up a really important part of our civic obligation and the importance of civic literacy, is that people feel like it's their obligation as citizens to be involved and engaged, and part of that is voting, but other parts of it are showing up every single day when there's a town hall, showing up and talking to people, talking to statesmen, and talking to people who are interested in running. It's a really good way of not only forming early potential opposition to something, but also to showing support for things that you do care about. So yeah, I mean, voting is extremely important part of being a good citizen. But it's also important to show up every single day, especially in a democracy.
Well, we're gonna continue, talking to you and speaking to you throughout the day. We love having your expertise. We love having you on to hear your expertise. So we're gonna continue hearing you from the rest of the day. But I think right now we're gonna take a break, and we'll hear from you later on.
Sounds like a plan. Have a we'll have a midterm.
Yeah. um, yes.
Yep. All right, and we're joined again by Aaron Faver from Amarillo College and Princess Brian, who is covering the race for House 86. So, Princess, fill us in a little bit about this race.
I think the big thing with this race, especially with Jeffries, a lot of people have seen she's been endorsed by John Smithy, who has held this position for over 40 years. He's done a lot of work with Fort Price, working on that mental health hospital, bringing that to the Panhandle, and then most recently with the Panhandle Historical Museum, trying to fight to bring that back as well. So a lot of people have eyes on her because of that reason. Again, especially since Smithy is backing her. But you also have Haynes, who has done a lot of work, especially with libraries and school libraries, the books and stuff that they have and education purposes and stuff. And even though she's not backed by Smithy, she has a lot of people in the Panhandle. So she has city council members, she has a lot of first responders and stuff like that also backing her race. So I think it's interesting to see it play out and just how big that Smithy endorsement could kind of play a role in this race overall.
And so, how does that play a factor in getting an endorsement from the candidate, or not the candidate, the incumbent that's in there already? How does that play a factor?
Yeah, that's the person that's stepping down. I guess it depends. All depends on their popularity.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, like the type of endorsement that it is, like the American or the Amarillo Police Officers Association, for example, obviously carries a lot of water for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
In these types of campaigns, but also you always want to look at like what are the grassroots potential power there. Like, I mean, and I think that's the question: is what power does a candidate who's stepping down from office have to bring or drive more voters out to the polls that wouldn't have done it before, right? And I mean, I guess having Representative Smithy go out and publicly endorse you, the day. What impact is it going to have today? It's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that, but I mean that's essentially what we're asking, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what are those grassroots power do those smaller associations and other endorsements have, like that you were talking about the library? I mean, I imagine that people that go to the library and people that know that detail and know and work in libraries, I mean, probably are likely voters.
Yeah.
It seems like that's a good place to hang out if you're trying to get people to come out to the polls. It's a good place where, I mean, elections, I mean, I remember I voted at the library, just the other day. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense that that's the kind of voter you want.
Yeah. And I think especially with the primaries, these two candidates, you see them kind of run a lot on similar topics. They both want to keep water here in the Panhandle. Right. They both want to help with education and kind of the Texas education accounts that we see currently. So tell me, when voters are going in, like, what is the thing that kind of swings them one way or the other when you have candidates kind of running on the same platforms?
Oh, that's so hard. Yeah. I mean, can you imagine like it's like having two cars, right, with very similar features and different names, and really being okay with either one in some ways, but obviously not being something that we really want to say. And so, I mean, this is in a Republican primary, specifically with the candidates that we're talking about. It's hard to draw a contrast with people that you mostly agree with.
Yeah.
So in some ways it kind of plays into this question of how much contrast is necessary to win, because you want to draw the most to be able to get people to come out, but you don't want to draw so much that you give ammunition to your opponents either. And that's always a challenge. At the same time, given the voter base in this particular race, really what we're choosing is who's going to be on the ballot, but and because of that question of whether or not the grassroots voting base is changing, or if it's there's going to be a greater Democrat. I don't want to say that that's going to be definitive, but right. In the past you've always been able to look at the primary, particularly in this part of the world, and and try to figure out whether or not that's going to be the candidate that's going to end up winning in November. That's probably not the most popular thing to say all the time, but it's something that has a tendency to be true, especially in this neck of the woods.
And I think another big thing with this race, this is the first time we're seeing this much attention with it because John Smithy has held that position for so long. So tell me, like, what are you experiencing? Like, people talking more about this race, getting more involved, and paying a little bit more attention to it.
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing that I personally notice is the amount of direct mail that I've gotten so much direct mail.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know, it's probably, I don't know, on the average 3 or 4 a day, something like that. It's a lot, and I don't mean that in in a sarcastic way. I mean it's a lot because it's clear that there's competition. It's clear that there's contrast being drawn, and it's clear that that there's money being spent, and that again can end up cutting lots of different ways, right? I mean, on one hand, you might need the money. On another, I mean, it's like also like looking at historic numbers. I think we were speaking a second ago off camera. Sorry, but it's an interesting problem. By the way, I'm kind of right here between both of y'all, going back and forth. Sorry, like want to talk to both of y'all. But yeah, it's challenging, you know, because you're splintering people that you want to vote for you in November. You don't want them to come out not liking you and not wanting to come and vote in November. So you've got to be careful about alienating voters that otherwise would have voted for you.
Now we've seen a lot of. It seems like we've seen a lot more of Jamie Haynes's signage over Holly Jeffries. Can that also play a factor into of getting like name recognition of people have seen that name, I know that name over maybe a Holly Jeffries sign, or is it something where people are kind of maybe kind of tired of seeing a name? Can that play a factor in too, or is that something where again that name recognition, that name kind of keeps populating in people's minds, so when they go to a ballot they have recognized that name and they have seen that name?
Yeah, I mean, if my name were Abraham Lincoln, I would probably have a better chance of winning, especially if nobody knew any other thing about me, was that other than my name. But I'm sure that people would know that they're not voting for Abraham Lincoln, because that would be silly. But I mean, people would. I mean, it is name recognition does obviously have a role to play there. Being known in a place and campaigning for a really long period of time is a different strategy than showing up to the party a little bit late but crashing it. Right, and some people like party crashers, and some people like people that have been there from 7 until and stay until 2:00 in the morning. And I mean, there's just different approaches to, and every district is different, every voter base is different, and it depends on at any given time. You know, one voter base could go one way. Of course, we've had a tremendous amount of polarization in the country the last decade and a half, longer than that even. I mean, we could argue that that's 30 or 40 years in the making, even 50. But I would argue that if we start getting within 50 years, then we'd probably get into grounds where we'd say that what you're doing is you're trying to play to people's preferences, and getting people to change their behavior at the booth is really hard, because they've already made up their minds. If they don't know who they're going to vote for, though, having the candidate be endorsed by somebody like Representative Smithy could make a difference. And I mean, it's it's up to, especially if they don't think there's much of a difference between the two candidates to begin with. All right. What is tried and true? What if there's a wild card in the race, so to speak? Then what do you? I mean, you want to tried and true, right? On the other hand, obviously that can backfire.
And speaking of this race, let's even talk about what District 86 kind of covers in Austin. What does that position kind of mean like to you when you're studying political science? How would you define that to your students?
District 86?
Yes.
Well, it's a very it's a conservative rural part of Texas, right? That's the first thing that strikes my mind is the fact that this is a changing demographic, an area where what people's expectations out of their government might be changing, and I say might because it's not. I mean, it's not definitive. Nothing is defined yet, and it's forming. And I mean, if John Smithy steps down, obviously it kind of shakes up shakes up the expectation, and whatever people are trying to figure out, they're going to do for the next legislative session, obviously is going to have a major impact on that. And so yeah, it's a rural part of Texas. There's always a sense of community, I would argue, in 86. Obviously, education is extremely important. It's the center of people's life. It's the hallmark of rural life, and people have their almost like a religious value in not just education, but also in the sports that they play, and so the optics of that are a big place to talk about politics and talk about shared values, but also contrasted values.
Yeah.
And so yeah, as all those things change, obviously we have a big agribusiness economy. We have a lot of energy and mineral rights that are always consistently on the ballot. And what people talk about, obviously, as well as what's going on in the world, and how does that affect the regular ordinary taxpayer in rural District 86 of Texas. Like how does that influence the cost of raising a cow and loving it to steak, if you will, and doing all the things that you do to be able to get the produce and everything else to market. How does all that stuff get affected by changing energy costs? How does that all get affected by increased taxes or decreased taxes or property taxes or, you name it? It's 86 is a place where all of those things matter.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, we want to make sure that the changing demographics are all changing. But I mean, they're represented. They have an obligation to do, as we were talking about earlier today. But also there is something else that's on the ballot, which is really kind of like an intangible quality, which is just trying to tap into people's into the spirit, if you will, of the people, and that's a really sweet, kind, and giving, compassionate spirit, I think, that people of 86 have.
Yeah.
And how does Seat 86 change when you have a senior lawmaker come or step down, and you have a freshman lawmaker come in after so long, whether that's a Republican or a Democrat?
Right. So one way to think about it is from the perspective of the people that are in Austin, right? I mean, how are things determined in the House of Representatives in terms of what they expect out of the new representative?
Yeah.
And they're going to look at what model are they coming from, and how do we keep our, depending on I guess what base you're looking at, how can we use that to have more consensus and to consolidate more power into voting and turning that into wins in the governor's office with a bill being signed into law. That is one way of thinking about it. Another way of thinking about it is obviously the voters themselves, and whether or not they have realistic. You can have realistic expectations of someone in office that has never served in that capacity before. It's a rough one, especially with something like that's been held by someone else for such a long time, who holds so much trust and respect, and obviously the question is, what does a mandate mean from the people of 86, and how do you end up orchestrating that into an actual not just a campaign for office, but a campaign for laws?
Mm-hmm. It kind of building up on that question. You have Representative Fairley, who's in Austin and still pretty new. So if you have a freshman representative also representing District 86, how could that play a role in how Amarillo is presented out in Austin?
First, I would think of it as an opportunity, right? I mean, you've got an opportunity that you don't have very often in government and politics and representation, which is building a new brand. Whether, I mean, again, what that ends up meaning is not really necessarily, because, I mean, to some extent, the electorate gets to determine how much of that brand is theirs and how much of it is the mandate that they're providing to the representative. And there's all kinds of different models of that. So, I mean, that's the first thing, is an opportunity for those two to really go out and team up and try to do big things together. But it's I mean, I suppose that there's also the opportunity for communication to not be to be there. It's okay to be new. Like it's hard. This is a hard business we're talking about. Something where you can be doing it for 40 years and still not know everything about it, and still be surprised and still be in need of changing and reorienting your path. So in that kind of a world, it's you have lots of room to make mistakes, but obviously you're also trying to calculate in such a way that doesn't disrupt the way of life for the community. So I expect there to be mistakes that are made, and I expect there to be newcomer types of issues. But at the same time, this is a wonderful opportunity for them to get to rebrand. And by rebrand, I don't mean repackage, right? Rebrand is a way of thinking about young minds, I suppose, energetic, a new type of energy to be associated with. I mean, think about the type of spirit that it takes to be able to raise cattle and to run them all over the place, and to be a farmer. Like, they have so much energy. They require so much energy and nonstop energy to be able to do those professions. It's something that people relate to in this area, and so it makes sense that we have an opportunity to do a lot of energizing of the base, if you will. And I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens, no matter who wins.
Yeah. All right. Well, Aaron, thank you. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
We appreciate your expertise.
Well, thank you.